I am Rebecca, 33 years old, and I was bleeding out on a sterile hospital bed when I realized my family was waiting for me to die. I had just survived a horrific rollover crash on Interstate 95 on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My ribs were crushed, my lungs were bruised, and the emergency room around me was a chaotic blur of shouting doctors and frantic nurses. Through the blinding pain, I heard a nurse put her phone on speaker to talk to my adoptive mother, Catherine. The nurse urgently explained that I was in critical condition and needed immediate surgery. Catherine's voice echoed through the chaotic room, perfectly calm and annoyed. She told the nurse they were busy basting the turkey for my sister Brittany's in-laws. She actually said if she dies, call us to claim the body, but otherwise it is not our problem. Before I tell you how I made them pay for those exact words with a federal prison sentence and total bankruptcy, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been abandoned by your own family when you needed them the most. The emergency room went entirely dead silent after the call ended. The frantic energy of the trauma bay just evaporated. A young nurse standing near my head lowered her gaze, her eyes brimming with a sickening mixture of shock and profound pity. The attending physician cleared his throat awkwardly and ordered the staff to prepare the operating room, purposely avoiding my eyes. Lying there under the glaring fluorescent lights, my physical agony suddenly felt entirely secondary to the crushing weight of Catherine's words. I could feel warm blood pooling in my abdomen from the internal injuries, and every shallow breath I took sent white-hot lightning radiating through my shattered ribcage. But the physical trauma was absolutely nothing compared to the psychological horror washing over me. My adoptive parents did not just lack empathy, they literally wished I would not survive the night. The doctors frantically pushed IV lines into my arms and strapped an oxygen mask over my face. I watched their mouths moving, shouting orders about blood pressure drops and massive internal bleeding, but all I could hear was the cold dismissal in Catherine's voice. "We are busy basting the turkey." It was completely surreal. I was fighting for every single gasp of air, terrified that my punctured lungs were going to collapse at any second. Meanwhile, the people who brought me into their home were prioritizing a holiday dinner over my survival. The sharp, metallic smell of my own blood filled my nose as the nurses cut away my shredded blazer and blouse. One of the trauma nurses squeezed my hand tightly, whispering that I was going to be okay, but her voice trembled uncontrollably. She knew what I had just realized in that cold room. I was completely and utterly alone in the world. The heavy pain medications they pumped directly into my veins did absolutely nothing to numb the deep, agonizing realization that my life meant less to my family than a roasted bird and impressing my sister's guests. Every face looking down at me held the same tragic understanding. They were rushing to save a woman whose own mother had just discarded her like trash. I wanted to scream to demand why I was so unlovable, but my throat filled with fluid, forcing me to choke on my own despair instead. As the medical staff wheeled my gurney down the long, freezing corridor toward the surgical wing, my mind violently pulled me backward into my childhood. The pain medication began to blur the edges of reality, forcing memories to flash before my eyes like a cruel movie. I saw myself at every Thanksgiving for the past decade standing in the kitchen of their lavish suburban house, handing over my credit card to pay for the expensive private catering they always insisted upon. I was the family ATM, the reliable bank they could endlessly withdraw from. They never thanked me for funding their luxurious lifestyles. Instead, William and Catherine would sit at the head of the long dining table and mock my career. They would laugh with their wealthy friends pointing at me and saying I was just a boring accountant with no real ambition. They constantly compared me to Brittany, the golden child who married Jamal, a flashy restaurant entrepreneur. They praised Jamal for his big ideas and high-end connections, willfully ignoring the fact that I was the one secretly paying the bills when his ventures inevitably failed. My practical, logical life as a forensic accountant was a constant source of amusement for them. I worked 80-hour weeks tracking financial fraud and unspooling complex money laundering schemes for major corporations. I built a highly lucrative and stable career, yet my family treated my success as a tedious joke. To them, I was just the dull, uninteresting sister who was only useful when the catering invoice arrived, or when Brittany needed thousands of dollars to cover her out-of-control credit card debt. The wheels of the gurney bumped hard over the elevator threshold, jarring my broken ribs and snapping me back to the agonizing present. The pain was blinding, a sharp tearing sensation deep in my chest. I struggled to keep my eyes open as the bright surgical light suddenly washed over my face. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, telling me to count backward from 10. I made it to 8 before a sudden piercing alarm shattered the quiet of the operating room. It was the terrifying continuous tone of my own heart monitor flatlining. The last thing I heard before slipping into absolute darkness was a doctor shouting for the defibrillator, while my mother's callous words echoed in my fading mind. "If she dies, call us to claim the body." I opened my eyes to the rhythmic hum of life support machines, disoriented and paralyzed by a dull ache that gripped my entire torso. The bright overhead lights of the intensive care unit pierced my vision as my mind slowly pieced together the fragments of the accident. I had survived the surgery. According to the wall clock and the dates on the whiteboard across the room, 48 hours had passed since I flatlined on the operating table. It was now Friday morning, the day after Thanksgiving. I turned my head slightly, fighting the stiff medical collar around my neck, and looked at the empty visitor chair beside my bed. No one was there. No flowers, no cards, no signs that anyone in the world knew I existed or cared that I had almost died. A nurse noticed I was awake and gently handed me my personal belongings bag, which included my cracked but still functioning cell phone. I pressed the power button, my thumb shaking as the screen illuminated. I opened my messages, expecting to see a flood of panicked texts from William, Catherine, or Brittany. The screen was completely blank. I checked my missed calls, my voicemails, and even my email inbox. There was absolute silence. Not a single member of my family had tried to reach out in the 2 days since the hospital informed them of my critical condition. They had eaten their turkey, celebrated their holiday, and gone to sleep without sparing a single thought for whether I was dead or alive. The sheer psychological isolation of that moment hit me harder than the physical trauma of my crushed ribs. I stared at the blank phone screen until it went dark, feeling a cold, hollow void expand inside my chest. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy their affection, funding their vacations, and covering their financial mistakes, hoping that one day they would look at me and see a daughter instead of an open wallet. Lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to intravenous drips and monitors, the brutal reality finally set in. I was nothing to them. I was completely alone, abandoned by the very people who had legally promised to protect me. My bitter reflections were interrupted by a soft knock on the open door frame of my recovery room. A woman in a crisp gray suit stepped inside, holding a thick clipboard and looking incredibly uncomfortable. She introduced herself as the hospital billing administrator and apologized for disturbing me so soon after a major surgery. She explained that she needed to discuss a pressing issue regarding my admission paperwork and emergency procedures. I nodded, assuming this was a routine request for my insurance copay or deductible signature. Instead, she pulled a stamped document from her clipboard and handed it to me with a sympathetic sigh. She informed me that my health insurance claim had been categorically denied by the provider. I frowned in confusion, explaining that I was fully covered under the premium executive health plan managed through William's overarching corporate account, a policy I personally reimbursed him for every single month. The administrator shook her head slowly, pointing to a highlighted line on the denial letter. She stated that William had personally contacted the insurance provider and officially removed me from the family policy. He had not done this weeks or months ago. According to the timestamp on the cancellation notice, he had executed the removal exactly 48 hours prior. He cut off my medical coverage on Wednesday morning, mere hours before my catastrophic accident on the highway. I stared at the paper, reading the confirmation of termination over and over again, unable to process the sheer malice of his action. The administrator cleared her throat again, bringing my attention back to the grim reality of my situation. She handed me a preliminary itemized invoice detailing the costs of my trauma care. the emergency room resuscitation, the complex thoracic surgery, the anesthesia, and my ongoing stay in the intensive care unit. The total amount due was staggering. I was facing $150,000 in immediate medical debt, and without active insurance coverage, the hospital required a payment plan or a massive deposit before they could proceed with any further rehabilitative treatments. My adoptive father had intentionally stranded me financially, leaving me to face a mountain of debt, while I was physically broken and confined to a hospital bed. As the administrator left the room to give me time to process the devastating news, my forensic accountant brain automatically took over, pushing past the emotional betrayal to analyze the cold, hard facts. I deal with financial discrepancies and hidden motives for a living, and the timing of William's action was far too precise to be a random administrative update. He canceled my comprehensive health insurance policy exactly 2 days before Thanksgiving. More importantly, he executed this sudden financial separation right before my 34th birthday, which happened to fall exactly on Thanksgiving Day this year. I stared at the ceiling, piecing together the timeline with absolute precision. William is a greedy, calculated man who never makes a financial move without a clear profit motive. Removing me from the policy saved him a few $100s, but leaving me entirely uninsured right before a major milestone birthday defied all logical explanation. Why the 34th birthday? It made absolutely no sense unless there was a hidden financial trigger, a specific date mandated by a contract, or a legal trust that I was completely unaware of. My mind raced through every document I had ever signed for them. The sudden influx of adrenaline made my monitors beep rapidly, alerting the nursing staff at the central station. As I tried to slow my breathing and calm my racing heart, a movement outside my glass door caught my attention. Standing at the nurse's station was a tall, imposing man wearing a sharp black suit jacket. He was speaking quietly but firmly to the head nurse, sliding a leather-bound folder across the counter. He glanced over his shoulder, his dark eyes locking directly onto mine through the glass window. He was not a doctor, and he was definitely not family. The man in the black jacket spoke a few final clipped words to the charge nurse, turned on his heel, and strode purposefully down the long corridor until he vanished entirely from my line of sight. Seconds later, a hospital billing clerk entered my recovery room, looking utterly bewildered and slightly out of breath. He tightly clutched the exact same leather-bound folder the mysterious man had just handed over at the front desk. The clerk approached my bed with hesitant steps, his eyes darting rapidly between me and the paperwork as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He cleared his throat nervously and extended the folder toward my lap, quietly explaining that there had been a rather monumental update to my immediate financial situation. I reached out with a trembling hand, ignoring the sharp pull in my crushed ribs, and flipped open the heavy cover. Inside was the itemized invoice demanding $150,000 for my trauma care. Only now a bold stamp reading "Paid in Full" sat heavily across the bottom right corner. I stared at the red ink, my forensic accounting background screaming that this was completely impossible. Medical bills of this massive magnitude are never settled instantly by anonymous benefactors. I looked up at the clerk and demanded an explanation. He stammered, explaining the balance had been cleared via a rapid, untraceable offshore wire transfer routed through a secure Cayman Islands banking entity. The hospital administration verified the funds, and the transaction was finalized. My mind raced to comprehend the sheer scale of the event. Someone with immense wealth and serious international connections had just erased a life-ruining debt in the blink of an eye. Before I could formulate another question, the clerk reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He placed a pristine black velvet box onto my lap, right on top of the cleared invoice. The box felt heavy against my legs, exuding an aura of quiet authority. The velvet was flawless, catching the harsh light and absorbing it completely. The clerk backed away slowly, his posture rigid with a mix of awe and fear. He swallowed hard and relayed a message that made the blood freeze in my veins. He told me the man in the black jacket had given very specific orders regarding the delivery of this item. The instructions were absolute and chillingly precise. I was to take the box, leave the hospital, and absolutely under no circumstances was I to break the seal until I was securely locked inside my apartment. I stared at the velvet box, my pulse hammering against my fractured ribcage. The clerk took another cautious step backward toward the doorway, eager to escape the heavy tension filling the small room. Before crossing the threshold, he paused and delivered the final part of the stranger's message. He lowered his voice to a hushed whisper and said, "The gentleman told me to tell you that their game is over." Those 4 words struck me with the force of a physical blow, setting off a chain reaction of terrifying clarity. Their game. He meant William. He meant Catherine. He meant my golden child sister Brittany and her flashy husband Jamal. Someone out there had been watching my family. Someone knew exactly what they were doing to me, knew about the financial abuse, knew about the canceled insurance policy, and knew they had abandoned me to die alone. This mysterious benefactor did not step in out of random charity. This was a calculated intervention designed to intercept my family's malicious agenda. The overwhelming sensation of victimhood began to rapidly dissolve, replaced by a burning sense of mystery and incoming vengeance. I gripped the black velvet box tightly in my hands. Whoever this man was, he had just handed me the ultimate weapon to destroy the people who had tried to erase me. The discharge process was an absolute nightmare of physical agony. Despite the doctor's strong recommendation to remain under observation, I signed the medical release forms against medical advice. Every movement felt like shattered glass grinding inside my chest, but the burning need for answers overpowered my broken body. I refused the wheelchair, leaning heavily on the walls as I forced myself to walk down the long hospital corridors. The nurses watched me leave with worried expressions, handing me a paper bag containing my pain prescriptions and my ruined clothing. I stepped out into the freezing November air, clutching the black velvet box tightly against my stomach like a protective shield. I hailed a passing taxi, carefully maneuvering my battered frame into the back seat to avoid jarring my broken ribs. During the agonizing ride across the city, adrenaline coursed through my veins, effectively masking the worst of the trauma. My mind operated with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned forensic accountant preparing for a massive audit. I analyzed every variable, every potential motive, and every possible connection this mysterious man could have to William's sudden financial betrayal. Suspicion sharpened my focus, turning my lingering physical weakness into pure, unadulterated resolve. I finally arrived at my dark, empty apartment building, paid the driver, and limped heavily up the steps to my front door. I locked the deadbolt behind me, letting the absolute silence of my sanctuary wash over me. I did not turn on the main overhead lights, preferring the safety of the dim shadows filtering through the blinds. Moving rigidly into the kitchen, I placed the black velvet box dead center on my granite countertop. I stared at the smooth surface of the box for a long, breathless moment, truly understanding that my entire existence was about to permanently change. The victim they had created died on that highway. I took a steadying breath, reached out, and finally broke the seal. The hinges of the velvet box yielded with a soft click, revealing an interior lined in crisp white satin. Resting precisely in the center were 3 distinctly different items that felt completely alien to the modest life I had always known. The first was a heavy metallic key with a serial number etched into its brass surface. It was undeniably a secure bank vault key, the kind used in high-security financial institutions that required dual authentication to access. My fingers brushed past the cold metal to pick up the second object, a sleek, matte black USB drive. As a professional who handled sensitive corporate data daily, I recognized the hardware immediately. It was a military-grade encrypted flash drive specifically designed to self-destruct its internal memory if anyone attempted to bypass its complex security protocols without the exact biometric or numeric passcode. The final item was a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with deep red wax. The heavy stationery felt substantial, radiating an intimidating sense of formal authority. I carefully peeled the wax seal away, fighting a sudden wave of dizziness as the reality of my bizarre situation truly began to set in. I slid the thick parchment from the envelope and unfolded it under the dim light of my kitchen pendant lamp. The letterhead was embossed with the crest of an elite private wealth management firm located in the heart of Manhattan. My eyes scanned the elegant typed font, instantly searching for a signature at the bottom of the page. It was signed with a bold, slashing stroke by a man named Harrison. I had never heard this name before in my entire life, yet this total stranger had just paid off a massive medical debt and delivered a package that felt like a ticking time bomb. I took a deep, steadying breath, deliberately ignoring the sharp throbbing in my chest, and directed my full attention to the very first line of the document, preparing myself for whatever truth awaited me. The letter began with a formal introduction that instantly shattered the entire foundation of my existence. Harrison clearly identified himself as the senior managing partner of the wealth firm, and more importantly, the personal attorney to my late biological grandfather. He wrote that my grandfather was a highly successful real estate tycoon who had built a massive empire of commercial properties across the eastern seaboard. I stared at the words, feeling a profound sense of vertigo wash over me. For 28 years, William and Catherine had endlessly reminded me that I was a poor, unwanted orphan. They constantly claimed they had taken me in out of the sheer goodness of their hearts, rescuing me from a miserable life in the state foster system. They demanded my perpetual gratitude for putting food in my mouth and a roof over my head. Harrison's letter aggressively dismantled every single one of those malicious lies. He explained that my biological parents had died tragically when I was a toddler, but they had not left me destitute. Far from it. My grandfather, devastated by the loss of his son, had immediately established a massive ironclad financial safety net to ensure I would never experience a single day of hardship. According to the documents outlined in the letter, I was not a charity case. I was the sole uncontested heir to a private trust currently valued at exactly $45 million. I gripped the edges of the heavy parchment, my knuckles turning white as I struggled to process the astronomical figure. $45 million. The sheer scale of the wealth was completely unfathomable, yet Harrison laid out the legal parameters with the precise, undeniable terminology of a seasoned trust attorney. The revelations in the letter continued, each sentence hitting me like a physical blow to my fractured ribs. Harrison detailed how the trust had been meticulously structured to remain entirely hidden from me until I reached a specific age of full maturity. He explained that he had been legally bound by a strict confidentiality agreement, forced to watch from a distance as I grew up, unable to intervene directly in my daily life. He wrote that he had spent the last decade quietly monitoring my professional career, observing my transformation into a highly capable forensic accountant with immense pride. He praised my resilience, my fierce independence, and my analytical mind. However, the tone of the letter grew noticeably darker in the final paragraphs. Harrison warned that the people who raised me had weaponized my grandfather's protective measures against me. He stated that the time for observation was over and the time for aggressive legal action had officially arrived. The final section of the letter delivered a sickening twist that made my stomach churn with absolute revulsion. Harrison laid bare the true parasitic nature of my adoptive parents. William and Catherine had never loved me. They had intentionally adopted me solely to gain legal guardianship status, which granted them direct authorized access to the trust's massive annual dividend payouts meant for my upbringing. They had shamelessly funded their entire luxurious lifestyle, their lavish mansion, and Brittany's endless shopping sprees, using the wealth my biological family had left behind to protect me. I was nothing but a highly profitable hostage in their home. A cold, terrifying rage began to radiate through my veins, entirely overriding the agonizing pain in my chest. The abusive childhood, the constant financial demands, the canceled health insurance, and their blatant refusal to visit me in the trauma ward suddenly aligned into one horrifying, perfectly calculated scheme. I carefully folded Harrison's letter and placed it back onto the kitchen counter. I picked up the encrypted military-grade USB drive, my mind already operating with lethal analytical precision. I walked over to my dining table, opened my laptop, and plugged the drive directly into the open port. A prompt for a decryption key appears instantly on the black screen. I pull out Harrison's letter, scanning the dense text, until I find a string of alphanumeric characters hidden seamlessly in the footer. I type them in. The drive unlocks with a soft chime. Folders cascade across my screen, labeled with years dating back to my early childhood. The sharp, persistent ache in my ribs fades into the background, completely overridden by the hyper-focused state that makes me a top-tier forensic accountant. I am no longer a battered accident victim shivering in a dark apartment. I am a predator tracking her prey through a dense digital jungle. I open the master ledger file and my breath catches in my throat. The sheer volume of transactions is staggering. I immediately start running specialized macro scripts to organize the raw banking data, sorting thousands of offshore wire transfers, domestic deposits, and corporate withdrawals. My eyes scan the endless columns, easily identifying the complex web of shell companies and hidden accounts William had meticulously set up. He thought he was being incredibly clever by layering the transfers through secondary and tertiary holdings, but to an expert auditor, his digital footprints are as bright as neon signs on a dark street. I pull up a split-screen cross-referencing the trust fund withdrawal dates with the massive deposits made into William and Catherine's primary checking accounts. The correlation is flawless. Every single quarter for the past 28 years, a massive dividend payout was generated by my grandfather's commercial real estate empire. And every single quarter within 48 hours of that payout, hitting the primary guardian account, William systematically siphoned the funds away. He categorized them as administrative fees, elite educational expenses, and intensive guardianship compensation. He had created an entire fictitious ecosystem of expenses to justify bleeding the trust dry. I trace a specific wire transfer from 5 years ago, watching the money flow from the trust corpus into a Cayman Islands holding company, and then loop back directly into William's personal investment portfolio. The audacity is absolutely breathtaking. He weaponized complex banking loopholes to ensure I saw none of the wealth, carefully maintaining my status as the grateful, impoverished adopted daughter, while he quietly hoarded millions. As I dive deeper into the fabricated expense reports, the reality of my family's lavish lifestyle takes on a sickening new context. I open a file detailing personal asset acquisitions. I see the exact date William purchased his fleet of imported luxury sports cars. The transaction matches a fraudulent withdrawal labeled as my specialized medical care and developmental therapy. I scroll down to find Catherine's elite country club memberships, her extensive designer wardrobes, and her frequent trips to European wellness retreats. Every single cent of her fabricated high society persona was financed by dividends stolen directly from my inheritance. They wore my grandfather's hard-earned wealth while forcing me to wear second-hand clothes and work minimum-wage jobs. I cross-check the property deeds for the family mansion, confirming that the very roof they sleep under was purchased using funds diverted from my legal trust. The fury intensifies as I open the ledger detailing my sister's financial history. Brittany, the undisputed golden child of the family, lived a life of absolute unchecked privilege. I review the records of her Ivy League tuition, her extravagant sorority fees, and the massive cash down payment on her luxury downtown penthouse. The funds for her debt-free education did not come from William's hard work or any brilliant investments on his part. They were illegally siphoned from a high-yield subaccount explicitly designated for my future housing and university education. I spent years drowning in student loans, working double shifts to afford state college tuition, completely unaware that I was unwittingly paying for Brittany to live like royalty. Every time Catherine praised Brittany for her refined tastes and debt-free lifestyle, she was actively mocking my struggle. Every time William told me I needed to learn the value of hard work and fiscal responsibility, he was actively embezzling the money that would have given me a secure foundation. They built a towering monument to their own vanity, using bricks stolen directly from my future. The psychological cruelty of raising me in artificial poverty while spoiling their biological daughter with my stolen money is almost impossible to comprehend. I categorize the files, building an ironclad digital dossier of their grand larceny. I navigate to the most recent folders, focusing my attention on the last 5 years of financial data. That is when I uncover the most shocking revelation of the entire archive. I find a massive ongoing hemorrhage of trust funds directed toward a highly convoluted corporate entity. I trace the tax identification numbers and cross-reference the business licenses. The shell company belongs to Jamal. My brother-in-law loves to boast about his empire of high-end restaurants, posing as a brilliant self-made culinary entrepreneur. But the ledgers reveal a completely different pathetic reality. Jamal's restaurants are colossal failures. The operating costs vastly outweigh the revenue, and the establishments bleed cash every single month. Yet they miraculously stay open and expand. I follow the money trail and realize William has been illegally injecting millions of dollars from my trust fund directly into Jamal's failing business ventures. He is artificially propping up Jamal's fraudulent empire to launder the stolen inheritance and evade federal taxes. My family's entire existence, their wealth, their status, and their arrogant pride is a fragile house of cards built entirely on my stolen fortune. I pull away from the financial ledgers, my eyes burning from the harsh glare of the laptop screen, and locate the master legal folder containing my grandfather's original trust documents. As a professional forensic accountant, I am trained to spot financial anomalies, but legal documents dictate the strict rules of engagement. I open the primary trust charter, scrolling quickly past the standard asset declarations and guardianship provisions. The dense legalese is exceptionally tedious, designed entirely to obscure the core mechanics of the massive wealth transfer. I run a quick text search for the specific termination parameters regarding William and Catherine's guardianship status. The document highlights a heavily guarded subsection buried deep within the bylaws. My pulse quickens as I read the bold text detailing the absolute transfer of power. The specific legal clause is astonishingly clear and incredibly precise. My grandfather had explicitly mandated that William and Catherine's guardianship, along with their access to the annual dividend payouts, was strictly temporary. The entire $45 million corpus is scheduled to transfer into my sole unrestricted control on the exact date of my 34th birthday. I glance down at the digital calendar displayed on the bottom corner of my laptop screen. My birthday is today, Thanksgiving Day. The timing of their recent actions suddenly aligns with terrifying clarity. William canceled my health insurance policy just 48 hours before this monumental legal deadline. He knew his financial control was rapidly expiring. I read the transfer clause again, ensuring I am not misinterpreting the complex legal jargon. There is absolutely no ambiguity. At midnight tonight, the financial pipeline that has funded their luxurious existence for 28 years will permanently shut off. The legal authority over the Cayman Islands, holding accounts the domestic property deeds and the restaurant investments, will automatically revert directly to me. William and Catherine must have known this day was coming since the very moment they adopted me. They have been watching the clock tick down for nearly 3 decades, plotting their next move as my 34th birthday steadily approached. I scroll further down the document, searching for the contingency protocols. Trusts of this massive magnitude always contain specific provisions outlining what happens if the primary beneficiary fails to reach the designated age of inheritance. I find the section titled Beneficiary Mortality Clause. The legal language is incredibly cold, outlining the exact chain of succession if I were to pass away prior to the full execution of the trust transfer. I read the paragraph, and the air is violently sucked from my bruised lungs. If I die before my 34th birthday, the guardianship clause does not simply terminate, it mutates. The legal structure designates my adoptive parents, William and Catherine, as the permanent, unrestricted heirs to the entire $45 million fortune. The morbid realization crashes over me with the devastating force of a physical blow, sending a fresh wave of adrenaline through my battered body. The sudden cancellation of my premium health insurance policy was not just a petty financial maneuver designed to save a few $100s. It was a calculated, lethal strategy implemented with pure malicious intent. William intentionally stripped away my medical safety net, guaranteeing that if I were involved in a catastrophic emergency, my care would be severely delayed or completely denied by the billing department. He deliberately set the stage for my death, carefully arranging the financial variables to ensure I would not survive to see my 34th birthday. The rollover crash on Interstate 95 was just a tragic accident, but their response to it was a meticulously planned execution by gross negligence. I gripped the edges of the desk, my knuckles turning white, as the full scope of their depravity becomes undeniable. They adopted a grieving toddler not to give her a loving home, but to secure a highly lucrative lottery ticket with a 34-year expiration date. They spent decades siphoning the dividends to fund their lavish country club lifestyle. But the ultimate prize was always the principal corpus waiting at the end of the timeline. The only thing standing between them and absolute unchecked wealth was my continued existence. If my heart monitor had flatlined permanently on that operating table, William and Catherine would have legally inherited every single cent my biological grandfather had built from the ground up. My death was literally their ultimate financial goal, the final payout they had been eagerly waiting for. The intense psychological horror of that phone call in the emergency room takes on an entirely new, deeply sinister dimension. When the trauma nurse informed Catherine about my crushed ribs and massive internal bleeding, she was not hearing bad news about her daughter. She was hearing the absolute best news of her life. They told the hospital staff they were too busy basting a turkey because they were eagerly and impatiently waiting for the hospital to call back and confirm my demise. They were practically celebrating in their kitchen, fully anticipating a $45 million windfall. They actively hoped my battered body would succumb to the massive blood loss before the clock struck midnight on Thanksgiving Day, making them exponentially richer in an instant. I survived, and by drawing breath today, I ruined their multi-million-dollar payout. Every agonizing gasp of air I took in that intensive care unit was a direct threat to their entire fraudulent empire. My survival destroyed their meticulously crafted endgame. I sit in the dark silence of my apartment, letting the chilling reality of their murderous greed wash over me. They did not just abandon me to die on a cold highway, they prayed for it with all their being. I slowly closed the master trust document, the residual pain in my chest, entirely eclipsed by a cold, calculated fury. I will not let them get away with this unimaginable betrayal. They wanted a corpse to collect their final massive payday, but instead, they are going to get an executioner. I grabbed my cell phone, ignoring the sharp pain in my fractured ribs. I dialed the secure line printed on the heavy stationery. The call connected after a single ring. A deep, resonant voice answered immediately, bypassing any standard corporate greetings. Harrison had been waiting for this exact moment. He addressed me by my full legal name, his tone carrying a distinct mixture of professional relief and urgent anticipation. He quickly verified my identity using a specific numeric code embedded in the encrypted flash drive, confirming that his security operative had successfully intercepted me at the hospital before William could intervene. I bypassed any expressions of gratitude for the cleared medical debt my forensic accountant, instincts demanding immediate answers regarding the stolen funds. I asked him why he had stood by in absolute silence for nearly 3 decades while William and Catherine looted my biological family's wealth. Harrison exhaled heavily, explaining the agonizing legal handcuffs my grandfather had inadvertently created. William had secured ironclad guardianship rights when I was a toddler, granting him unmitigated discretionary control over the annual dividend distributions. As the trust executor, Harrison was legally prohibited from challenging the guardian's financial authority without triggering a massive premature court battle. Harrison detailed the strategic necessity of his prolonged silence. If he had launched an early legal strike against my adoptive parents for embezzlement, William would have instantly realized he was under surveillance. William is an incredibly calculating predator who would have aggressively liquidated the accessible domestic assets, emptied the offshore holding accounts, and fled to a non-extradition country before the courts could freeze his passports. Harrison was forced to wait patiently in the shadows, quietly monitoring my rapid rise. As a forensic accountant, knowing that any premature interference would allow William to escape with the stolen millions permanently. The entire legal strategy relied entirely on my survival until the guardianship automatically dissolved on my 34th birthday today. Harrison explained that the terrifying highway crash had nearly destroyed his 28-year operation. When William abruptly canceled my premium health insurance policy, Harrison realized my adoptive parents were actively relying on my imminent demise to secure the permanent inheritance. He immediately dispatched his private security team to the intensive care unit to settle the catastrophic medical invoice and completely neutralize William's lethal financial blockade. Harrison assured me that the passive observation phase was finally over. Harrison smoothly shifted the conversation from our past grievances to immediate tactical maneuvers. He warned me that while the $45 million corpus automatically transfers into my absolute control precisely at midnight, William is not planning to surrender his luxurious lifestyle without a final desperate fight. Harrison revealed that his private surveillance team intercepted urgent communications indicating William intends to aggressively exploit my severe physical trauma. William plans to ambush me with fabricated tax documents designed to legally trick me into voluntarily signing away my entire inheritance right before the midnight deadline strikes. He assumes my heavy pain medication, combined with my emotional vulnerability after the crash, will make me an easy target for one last catastrophic legal manipulation. To permanently neutralize William's endgame, Harrison explained a critical legal hurdle we had to clear immediately. He required my direct authorized signature on a series of aggressive federal injunction documents to preemptively lock the trust accounts and block any outgoing wire transfers. More importantly, Harrison needed an independent medical professional to certify that I was currently of completely sound mind, entirely unaffected by the intense physical trauma or the heavy narcotic painkillers. This crucial medical certification would make my signatures absolutely bulletproof in federal court, effectively preventing William from falsely claiming I was mentally incapacitated when I authorized the sudden asset freeze. Without this airtight legal armor, William could potentially stall the impending federal investigation by filing endless retaliatory injunctions against the trust executors. Harrison then deliberately outlined the severe involvement of the federal authorities. Because William had been laundering my stolen dividend payouts through Jamal's failing restaurant empire, their financial crimes crossed state lines and constituted massive federal tax evasion. The FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division were already primed and waiting to completely dismantle the entire fraudulent operation. However, federal agents could not legally raid Jamal's commercial properties or seize William's hidden Cayman Islands accounts without my explicit legally binding consent to open the trust's historical financial ledgers to government auditors. Harrison needed my absolute authorization to unleash the full devastating weight of the federal justice system against the arrogant people who had unapologetically orchestrated my financial ruin and casually prayed for my death on the highway. Harrison proposed a clean, highly efficient resolution to the impending confrontation. He offered to immediately dispatch his elite legal team directly to my secure apartment, completely bypassing any need for me to interact with my abusers. He suggested I quietly sign the injunctions and seizure warrants from my kitchen counter, allowing the FBI agents to conduct synchronized morning raids on William's mansion and Jamal's restaurants tomorrow. Harrison strongly advised this passive strategy, emphasizing that my crushed ribs and severe internal bruising made any physical confrontation exceptionally dangerous. He wanted to handle the ultimate takedown entirely behind closed doors. I listened to his perfectly rational proposal, gripping the edge of my countertop as a dark, uncompromising fire ignited in my chest. I flatly refused to let the corporate lawyers handle my absolute retribution quietly in the shadows while I hid in my apartment like a terrified victim. My honed forensic accountant instincts and the burning sting of their absolute betrayal demanded a far more personal approach. I told Harrison to bring the finalized federal warrants directly to me, but I insisted on executing the catastrophic financial freeze myself. I wanted to look them straight in the eyes when their fraudulent empire collapsed into dust. Over the next 48 hours, my tiny apartment transformed into a secure digital command center. Harrison immediately arranged for a private medical concierge to evaluate me, providing the ironclad psychological certification, proving I was operating with mental clarity despite my fractured ribs. Once my legal competence was documented, we opened a secure encrypted communication channel linking my personal laptop directly to his firm's mainframe. I bypassed the agonizing physical pain radiating through my chest by diving headfirst into the raw financial data. We needed to map the trajectory of every single stolen dollar before the midnight deadline approached, and the offshore wire transfers pointed directly toward a disturbing, deeply interconnected local connection that frankly disgusted me to my absolute core. I isolated the primary recipient accounts and instantly recognized the corporate identification numbers. They belonged entirely to Jamal, my arrogant African-American brother-in-law, who constantly belittled my accounting career at every single family gathering. Jamal was utterly obsessed with projecting the flawless image of a highly successful self-made restaurant entrepreneur to the local elite. He wore custom-tailored suits, drove an imported luxury SUV, and loudly boasted about his unmatched business acumen. However, my intense forensic analysis of his actual operational ledgers revealed a pathetically incompetent manager. His bistros were hemorrhaging capital daily, plagued by terrible inventory management, abysmal customer retention, and severe operational bloat that should have bankrupted him within his very first 6 months of operation. Instead of filing for bankruptcy, Jamal allowed William to effectively purchase his bloated ego. The banking records showed exactly how the highly illegal arrangement functioned behind closed doors. William offered to save Jamal's failing culinary empire by injecting massive amounts of anonymous, untraceable capital. In exchange for the highly lucrative financial rescue, Jamal completely blindly signed over complete administrative control of his corporate banking portals directly to my adoptive father. Jamal willingly transformed his hospitality businesses into active shell companies desperate to maintain his fake billionaire persona on social media, while allowing William to operate a massive shadow economy right under the noses of the local unsuspecting authorities. The true malicious brilliance of William's financial scheme became glaringly apparent as I untangled the complex federal tax filings spanning over a decade. William was not just stealing my grandfather's trust fund dividends to buy country club memberships, luxury vehicles, and designer clothes for Catherine. He was actively committing massive federal tax fraud on a level that attracts severe federal attention. Taking millions of dollars directly from a monitored private trust account would immediately trigger aggressive compliance audits from the Internal Revenue Service. To bypass the mandatory federal oversight and completely avoid paying capital gains taxes on his stolen wealth, William desperately needed a legitimate-looking mechanism to wash the dirty money. Jamal's failing hospitality group provided the perfect high-volume cash business required to execute a textbook continuous money laundering operation. I tracked the specific laundering methodology William utilized flawlessly month after month. He would siphon the quarterly trust dividends into an untraceable offshore holding account located securely in the Cayman Islands. From there, he generated hundreds of fake catering invoices, bogus vendor contracts, and phantom equipment purchases billed directly to the accounts of Jamal's various restaurants. William then wired my stolen trust funds back into the United States to pay those fabricated corporate invoices, effectively washing the illegal offshore money through Jamal's domestic business accounts. The stolen inheritance entered the restaurant ledgers as dirty capital and exited as clean business revenue that William and Catherine could freely spend, without raising a single red flag, with federal tax regulators entirely insulating their luxurious suburban lifestyle from any unwanted legal scrutiny. The sheer arrogance of the financial setup made my blood boil, But the terrifying legal reality of the massive corporate structure was incredibly precarious for my pompous brother-in-law. Because Jamal was the sole registered owner and primary executive of the hospitality group, his digital signature officially authorized every single fraudulent tax return filed over the past decade. He genuinely believed his restaurants were suddenly turning a massive profit due to his own visionary leadership and brilliant marketing genius. He strutted around family Thanksgiving dinners, treating me like a pathetic failure, completely oblivious to the devastating fact that William had legally positioned him as the primary fall guy. If the Internal Revenue Service ever audited the restaurant ledgers, William could seamlessly claim complete ignorance, while Jamal absorbed the absolute entirety of a lengthy federal prison sentence. I spent the remaining hours compiling every piece of incriminating evidence into a comprehensive digital dossier. I isolated the exact routing numbers, highlighting the direct financial link connecting my grandfather's trust corpus to Jamal's fraudulent corporate accounts. I captured the digital timestamps verifying Williams' unauthorized transactions, proving that he orchestrated the entire money laundering operation. My ribs screamed in agony with every keystroke, my body begging for the painkillers I resolutely refused to take. I needed my mind razor-sharp, operating with the cold, unforgiving precision of a forensic auditor preparing a lethal federal indictment. I categorized the evidence into distinct legal violations, ensuring the incoming federal agents would have a perfectly wrapped case handed directly to them with zero room for error. Staring at the finalized encrypted portfolio on my screen, a profound sense of absolute power washed over my bruised frame. The unwanted adopted daughter they had discarded in a hospital room now held their total destruction in her hands. With a single authorized signature on Harrison's paperwork, I possessed the authority to send both my adoptive father and my brother-in-law directly to a maximum security federal penitentiary. I could completely dismantle William's stolen wealth and instantly annihilate Jamal's fake entrepreneurial empire with one highly calculated, irreversible strike. They genuinely thought they were the untouchable masters of their glamorous, impenetrable suburban universe, completely unaware that the very person they intentionally left to die alone on the highway was quietly sharpening the blade for their inevitable, highly publicized execution. The pale light of Thanksgiving morning crept through the slats of my apartment blinds, signaling the arrival of the most pivotal day of my entire life. I spent the night sleeping upright in my desk chair, unable to lie flat because the pressure on my crushed ribs made breathing impossible. My body was a roadmap of deep purple bruises, a physical reminder of the violent highway rollover that had nearly claimed my life. Today was my 34th birthday, the exact date my grandfather designated for the transfer of my inheritance. It was a milestone I was never supposed to survive, yet here I was holding the digital keys to my family's total destruction. I slowly stood up, gripping the edge of the granite kitchen counter to steady my trembling legs as a wave of nausea washed over me. I poured a glass of cold water and swallowed it dry, refusing to take the heavy painkillers the hospital had prescribed. I needed absolute mental clarity for the psychological war that was about to unfold. The silence of my apartment was shattered by the sharp chime of my cell phone vibrating against the dining table. For a fleeting second, a pathetic remnant of the old Rebecca hoped it was a panicked apology for abandoning me in the trauma ward. I picked up the device and saw my sister Brittany's name glowing brightly on the screen. I swiped open the notification and stared at the glowing pixels, letting the profound callousness of her words sink into my skin. The text message read, "Hey, are you out of the hospital yet? Dad needs you to come to dinner tonight. There is a tax document you have to sign. Do not be late and do not ruin the vibe." I read the short, demanding sentences 3 times, feeling a cold laugh build in the back of my throat. There was no question about my severe internal bleeding, no inquiry about my surgical recovery, and no mention of the fact that today was my birthday. My sister was treating a near-fatal car crash, like a minor scheduling inconvenience that threatened to disrupt her carefully curated holiday aesthetic. The sheer audacity of her message was almost difficult to comprehend. I had spent the last 48 hours assuming my family was simply cowardly hiding from the guilt of leaving me to die alone on an operating table. I had vastly underestimated their boundless arrogance and bottomless greed. They completely believed I was still the obedient, desperate scapegoat they had conditioned me to be. They expected me to drag my battered body across the city just to serve their financial needs, ignoring the fact that they had explicitly told the emergency room nurses that my survival was not their problem. Brittany was perfectly content to eat a lavish dinner funded by my stolen money provided I did not ruin her luxurious vibe with my depressing medical trauma. The casual mention of a mandatory tax document triggered every alarm bell in my highly trained forensic accountant brain. I knew exactly what William was attempting to execute. With my 34th birthday arriving today, the legal guardianship clause granting him unlimited access to the trust dividends was rapidly expiring. He knew that at midnight the entire $45 million corpus would automatically transfer into my name. William was backed into a corner completely terrified of losing his primary source of illicit wealth. He was using the Thanksgiving dinner as a carefully orchestrated ambush, planning to exploit my physical exhaustion and emotional vulnerability to secure his fraudulent empire. He assumed my severe pain would blind me to his maneuvering. William's strategy was as simple as it was evil. He planned to slide a dense legal document across the dining room table, casually framing it as routine tax season paperwork required for my old college accounts or standard family deductions. He was counting on me to blindly sign the paperwork just to keep the peace and appease his sudden demands. In reality, that document would be an irrevocable relinquishment of my rights to the grandfather's trust, legally transferring the entire $45 million principal directly into his permanent control. They invited me to dinner not to celebrate my survival or my birthday, but to execute the ultimate financial theft right before the midnight deadline stripped them of power. I placed my phone flat on the counter and stared out the window, watching the morning traffic pick up on the streets below. The victim they had raised would have cried, begged for an apology, and complied with their demands just to earn a seat at their table. The woman who unlocked that encrypted USB drive felt nothing but a lethal, icy calm. I picked up my phone and typed a direct, 3-word response to my sister. I will be there. I hit send, officially accepting their invitation and walking willingly into the exact ambush they had so carefully prepared. They wanted my signature, and I fully intended to give them one, just not the one they were anticipating. Immediately after replying to Brittany, I opened my secure messaging application and contacted Harrison. I typed a rapid update informing the trust attorney that William was accelerating his timeline and attempting to force a signature tonight at the family mansion. I told Harrison to finalize the federal injunctions, secure the FBI seizure warrants, and prepare his tactical teams for immediate deployment. I explicitly instructed him to bring the authorized legal paperwork directly to my apartment immediately. The trap was set, and the bait was in position. My family wanted to use a holiday dinner to steal my future, but I was going to use it to publicly execute their total and absolute destruction. The physical toll of my decision immediately demanded a massive price from my battered body. Stepping away from the kitchen counter required shifting my weight, which sent a violent spasm of agony radiating outward from my crushed ribs. Every single intake of breath felt like jagged glass scraping against my lungs. The hospital doctors had explicitly instructed me to remain completely bedridden for at least 2 weeks, warning that sudden movements could easily trigger secondary internal bleeding. However, lying down and surrendering to the trauma was an absolute luxury I could no longer afford. I gritted my teeth, forcing my trembling legs to carry me toward the master bathroom to prepare for the impending confrontation. I could not allow William and Catherine to dictate the terms of this evening. I gripped the edge of the bathroom vanity and stared at my reflection in the brightly lit mirror. The woman looking back at me was pale, haunted, and severely bruised, completely embodying the shattered victim my family expected to see walking through their front door. I opened the medical supply bag the trauma nurses had provided and pulled out a heavy-duty compression binder. Wrapping my torso was an excruciating ordeal. I had to exhale completely, hold my breath, and pull the thick elastic material agonizingly tight across my fractured rib cage. The intense pressure secured my broken bones in place, creating a rigid physical corset that allowed me to stand perfectly upright without immediately collapsing in sheer agony. I refused to arrive at their Thanksgiving dinner wearing the oversized sweatpants and loose recovery shirts the hospital staff had recommended. My family wanted to see me broken, weak, and desperate for their financial charity. I walked slowly into my walk-in closet and bypassed every piece of comfortable clothing I owned. Instead, I reached for a razor-sharp tailored charcoal suit I specifically reserved for hostile corporate audits and federal depositions. It was my professional armor. The heavy fabric and structured shoulders projected an aura of absolute uncompromising authority. I was not going to their house as a pathetic grieving daughter begging for an apology. I was attending as a top-tier forensic accountant prepared to dismantle a criminal enterprise. Forcing my arms into the tailored sleeves of the blazer brought tears of sheer pain to my eyes, but I swallowed the quiet groan building in my throat. I returned to the vanity mirror to apply a flawless layer of makeup, meticulously concealing the sickly, ghostly pallor of my skin and the heavy, dark circles dragging down my eyes. I added a bold, sharp lip color, entirely erasing any lingering trace of vulnerability from my face. By the time I finished, the bruised and bleeding accident victim had completely vanished. The woman standing in the mirror was a cold, calculating professional radiating power and total control. I was perfectly ready for war against the people who betrayed me. A heavy, authoritative knock at my front door instantly broke my intense concentration. I walked slowly toward the living room and glanced through the front window, spotting a massive, heavily tinted black SUV idling quietly at the curb. I unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open to find Harrison standing on my welcome mat. He wore a dark, immaculate suit, his posture rigid and commanding. He stepped inside my apartment, bringing the bitter chill of the autumn afternoon with him. Harrison took one look at my sharp, tailored suit and the rigid way I held my posture to protect my ribs. He gave a single approving nod, fully recognizing that I had shed my victimhood entirely and was prepared to execute the legal strike. Harrison moved directly to my kitchen island and placed a thick leather-bound briefcase onto the granite surface. The heavy brass latches snapped open with a sharp, echoing click that sounded like the cocking of a loaded weapon. He reached inside and pulled out a massive stack of finalized legal documents, spreading them meticulously across the counter. These were not mere cease and desist letters. They were aggressive, ironclad federal injunctions and authorized seizure warrants prepared by his elite legal team. Harrison explained that these documents represented the absolute pinnacle of financial warfare, specifically designed to instantly freeze every single domestic and offshore asset William had illegally acquired over the past 28 years. He handed me a heavy fountain pen and pointed to the signature lines highlighted in bright yellow ink. Harrison explained the exact mechanics of the impending operation in a low, serious voice. He told me that multiple tactical teams of federal agents were already fully staged in unmarked vehicles waiting out of sight near William's suburban mansion and Jamal's commercial restaurant properties. They were simply waiting for my authorized signature to activate the complete financial lockdown. I gripped the pen, ignoring the sharp pain radiating from my chest down my arm. With a steady, uncompromising hand, I signed my name across the federal warrants officially authorizing the total annihilation of my family's fraudulent empire. Harrison gathered the signed documents, securing them back inside his briefcase with a look of profound satisfaction. We left my apartment in silence, my movements slow but entirely deliberate as I climbed into the spacious back seat of his waiting SUV. The heavy doors closed, sealing us inside the quiet, climate-controlled interior. As the driver navigated the vehicle away from the city and toward the wealthy, manicured suburbs where my adoptive parents lived, Harrison handed me a secondary folder. It contained duplicate copies of the bank ledgers, the money laundering evidence against Jamal, and the forged tax document William planned to use against me. I reviewed the pages one last time, memorizing the devastating financial figures to use as ammunition. The sprawling tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood finally came into view through the dark-tinted windows. We slowly approached the massive iron gates of the luxury mansion my stolen inheritance had built from nothing. I stared at the towering brick facade, feeling an absolute icy calm settle deeply over my mind. I was no longer the desperate unloved child seeking their validation, nor was I the discarded accident victim left to die in a cold emergency room. That naive version of me was completely gone forever. As the SUV rolled smoothly up the pristine driveway, my transformation was absolutely final. The abused scapegoat was dead, and the executioner of their downfall had officially arrived. I stepped out of the heavy armored vehicle and ordered Harrison to wait exactly 5 minutes before initiating the final protocol. The brisk evening wind whipped violently across the sprawling manicured green lawn, biting at my face. But the thick medical compression binder held my fractured ribs perfectly and securely rigid against the cold. I slowly approached the towering entrance of the estate. The massive double oak doors were an extravagant custom architectural installation that William had constantly bragged about at endless dinner parties. I reached for the heavy solid brass handle, fully aware that those magnificent doors were paid for entirely by my stolen financial legacy. Pushing the heavy solid wood inward required an agonizing exertion of physical strength, sending a fresh violent spike of white-hot pain radiating directly across my battered chest. I strictly ignored the physical protest of my broken body and stepped boldly over the polished marble threshold into the grand foyer. The immediate overwhelming scent of perfectly roasted turkey mingling with the rich aroma of expensive imported wine flooded my senses. It was the deeply familiar, intoxicating perfume of a highly luxurious holiday celebration, meticulously curated by my parents to project an impenetrable image of flawless domestic bliss and financial superiority. Boisterous laughter echoed loudly from the formal living room down the long hall, sounding sharp, arrogant, and utterly carefree. Fine crystal glasses clinked together in joyous celebratory toasts, actively praising a bountiful harvest of massive wealth that absolutely none of them had actually earned. The sheer volume of their festive cheer was entirely sickening to witness. I stood completely alone in the sprawling grand entryway, letting the heavy custom oak doors click firmly shut behind me. Every pristine white marble tile beneath my feet, every sweeping silk drape framing the oversized windows, and every single drop of vintage wine belonged exclusively and permanently to me. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of designer heels rapidly approached the foyer area. Catherine rounded the corner from the massive chef's kitchen, holding a delicate crystal wine glass and wearing a pristine emerald green cocktail dress that easily cost more than my entire monthly apartment rent. She stopped dead in her tracks, the exact moment her cold eyes locked onto my face. There was absolutely no sudden gasp of maternal relief at seeing her daughter alive, no frantic rush to embrace me after a catastrophic highway collision. Instead, her perfectly manicured eyebrows pulled tightly together in a sharp, intensely judgmental frown. Her hostile gaze swept critically over my pale, heavily bruised complexion, and the rigid, highly unnatural way my tailored charcoal suit hung over my securely wrapped ribs. Pure disgust visibly rippled across her face, completely replacing any trace of empathy. She took a slow, deliberate step backward, aggressively, creating a noticeable physical distance between us, as if my physical trauma was somehow a contagious disease. "You look absolutely terrible, Rebecca," she stated coldly, her sharp voice dripping with extreme annoyance rather than a single ounce of maternal concern. She took a slow, calculated sip of her expensive wine, eyeing my professional dark attire with blatant, unapologetic disapproval. "I specifically told Brittany to text you and remind you not to ruin the vibe today. We have very important guests arriving shortly. You need to go straight into the powder room and apply some heavy concealer to those hideous purple bruises right now. We absolutely cannot have you walking around looking like a battered stray dog and making everyone incredibly uncomfortable during an upscale holiday dinner." I stared directly at the woman who had legally claimed to be my mother for nearly 3 decades, completely absorbing the sheer breathtaking magnitude of her calculated cruelty. She leaned in slightly closer, dropping her voice into a sharp, explicitly threatening whisper. Please do not mention your little car accident to Jamal's investors tonight. They do not like depressing stories, and they certainly do not want to hear your dramatic complaints while they are eagerly evaluating his massive new restaurant expansion. Just sit quietly at the far end of the table, eat your food without making a fuss, and do exactly what your father asks you to do. We are trying to secure a highly lucrative major business deal tonight, and your desperate, pathetic need for constant attention will absolutely not be tolerated. Just a few short days ago, that highly calculated psychological attack would have entirely shattered my fragile confidence and instantly reduced me to a stammering, apologetic mess. I would have frantically rushed to the downstairs bathroom, desperately attempting to cover my bruised face with makeup just to appease her fragile social ego. Today, however, the toxic gaslighting simply bounced harmlessly off my newly forged invisible armor. I looked directly into Catherine's cold, demanding eyes and let a slow, calm smile spread gradually across my face. I absorbed the vicious, cutting insult completely without reacting or flinching, intentionally denying her the dramatic emotional breakdown she so desperately wanted to provoke. My absolute, unwavering silence clearly unsettled her deep composure, but before she could issue another cruel command, I simply stepped directly around her, moving purposefully toward the main dining room. I crossed the wide threshold into the spectacular formal dining space, my highly trained forensic accountant brain immediately snapping into a hyper-focused analytical mode. I ignored the buzzing chatter of the assembled guests and began systematically cataloging the staggering wealth proudly displayed around the large room. I evaluated the massive cascading crystal chandelier suspended elegantly above the table, swiftly calculating its retail value and mentally matching it to a fraudulent trust withdrawal executed 3 years ago. My eyes tracked the imported mahogany dining table, the gleaming sterling silver cutlery, and the rare original oil paintings adorning the custom textured wallpaper. Every single extravagant luxury item proudly featured in this lavish room was a direct, completely irrefutable piece of serious federal criminal evidence, and I was absolutely prepared to legally repossess every single cent that fully and rightfully belonged to me tonight. The extravagant holiday dinner officially began with a chaotic flurry of scraping chairs as guests eagerly took their seats around the massive table. Jamal immediately seized the opportunity to take absolute center stage, dominating the conversation before the first course was served. He leaned back in his custom-upholstered chair, swirling rare vintage red wine, while boasting aggressively to the investors seated to his right. He shouted across the room about the grueling dedication required to single-handedly build a successful culinary empire. He passionately delivered a rehearsed monologue about the profound value of hard work, loudly claiming that true entrepreneurial success only comes to those willing to sacrifice sleep. Listening to Jamal arrogantly lecture the table about pulling himself up by his bootstraps was entirely nauseating, considering I knew with absolute forensic certainty that his entire business model was artificially inflated by illegal injections of my stolen trust fund cash. Right beside him, playing the role of the exceptionally supportive and successful wife, Brittany eagerly seized her own moment to command the table's attention. She dramatically extended her arm across the polished mahogany surface to accept a platter of roasted vegetables, making absolutely certain that the dining room lights caught the blinding sparkle of her newest accessory. A massive, flawless diamond tennis bracelet encircled her wrist, easily worth $50,000. She casually flicked her wrist to maximize the aggressive glitter, loudly interrupting Jamal to inform the investors that her brilliant husband had surprised her with the expensive jewelry to celebrate his latest acquisition. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of the entire scene was absolutely staggering to witness firsthand. Brittany proudly flaunted a diamond bracelet that was directly purchased using the stolen financial dividends that should have been securing my future, while Jamal accepted fawning compliments for a business empire built entirely on federal tax fraud and massive corporate embezzlement. They aggressively performed their fake high society success story for an audience of gullible investors, blissfully unaware that the true owner of their entire fraudulent reality was sitting silently at the absolute far end of the table, cataloging every single highly illegal boast for the impending federal indictment. The superficial conversation eventually shifted, and William's predatory gaze zeroed in on me, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. He noticed the heavy, rigid way I sat in my dining chair, fighting the intense physical agony radiating from my fractured ribs. Instead of offering a single ounce of genuine paternal sympathy for the horrific highway rollover crash I had miraculously survived just days ago, he seized the golden opportunity to publicly humiliate me in front of his extremely wealthy guests. He cleared his throat loudly, commanding the entire table's undivided attention, and pointedly asked how my little accounting job was holding up. He deliberately emphasized the word little, dripping with intense, mocking condescension, painting my specialized forensic accounting career as a pathetic dead-end hobby completely unworthy of any real respect. William took a slow, arrogant bite of his roasted turkey before delivering his carefully orchestrated psychological strike. He looked directly into my eyes and stated that if I were not just a basic number cruncher, I could actually afford my own premium health insurance policy and would not be desperately complaining about overwhelming hospital bills. He loudly proclaimed to the silent dining room that financial independence is a basic adult responsibility, aggressively insinuating that my current medical debt was a direct consequence of my own professional laziness and complete lack of ambition. The sheer blinding audacity of his statement was almost physically dizzying. The man who deliberately canceled my insurance coverage mere hours before my near-fatal collision was now publicly mocking my inability to pay the subsequent trauma center invoices. His cruel words were specifically designed to make me feel incredibly small, utterly insignificant, and completely dependent on his sudden bursts of financial charity. Catherine eagerly chimed in from the opposite end of the table, loudly agreeing with her husband's vicious assessment. She sighed dramatically, telling the captivated guests that they had tried for decades to instill a solid work ethic in me. But some people simply lack the basic drive required to achieve real, tangible success. They effortlessly tag-teamed the verbal assault, systematically tearing down my professional identity while simultaneously elevating their own fabricated status. They sat in a mansion paid for entirely by my biological grandfather's estate, brutally insulting my financial stability while actively stealing millions of dollars from my guarded trust fund accounts. I did not offer a single word of defensive protest, refusing to grant them the emotional breakdown they so desperately wanted to witness. Instead, I picked up my heavy silver fork and began eating my holiday dinner with slow, methodical, terrifying precision. I chewed my food in complete silence, my expression locked into an impenetrable, icy mask of pure professional composure. I simply sat there and watched them aggressively gorge themselves on their own massive, fragile egos. Every condescending laugh, every arrogant boast, and every cruel insult only fueled the dark, unrelenting fire burning fiercely inside my chest. They were happily digging their own financial graves right in front of me, entirely blinded by their unchecked arrogance. The air in the formal dining room grew increasingly thick with a heavy, palpable tension as the main course was slowly cleared away by the hired catering staff. I knew exactly what was coming next, carefully tracking the subtle, highly nervous glances William kept shooting toward his thick leather briefcase, resting quietly near the ornate sideboard. The vicious verbal insults were merely the psychological softening phase, a carefully calculated preamble specifically designed to severely break my resilient spirit before the real financial ambush finally began. They were meticulously preparing to spring their ultimate legal trap on me tonight, perfectly positioning the pieces for the final devastating theft of my massive inheritance. They assumed I was broken, defeated, and entirely helpless, wholly unaware that I was patiently waiting for the perfect moment to execute their total, absolute destruction. The catering staff moves efficiently around the room, collecting the china plates and replacing them with crystal dessert bowls. I watch the movements maintaining absolute stillness while the final remnants of the holiday meal disappear. The wealthy investors murmur polite compliments about the artisan pastries, oblivious to the heavy shift in the atmosphere. The moment the last server exits through the swinging kitchen doors, the facade of a festive family gathering evaporates entirely. The air grows thick and suffocating dense with unspoken demands and predatory anticipation. William pushes his chair back from the table with a harsh scraping sound that cuts through the background chatter. He stands up slowly, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, and walks with deliberate steps toward the ornate wooden sideboard. I track his every movement, my eyes fixed on the thick leather briefcase resting in the shadows. He unlatches the metal clasps with a sharp clack, plunging his hand inside to retrieve a thick stack of stapled papers. He returns to his seat at the head of the table, holding the documents with the smug confidence of a man who believes he holds all the winning cards. He does not bother handing the paperwork to me politely. Instead, he drops the heavy stack onto the polished mahogany surface and pushes it aggressively down the length of the table. The papers slide smoothly over the expensive wood, stopping directly in front of my dessert bowl. I look down at the pristine white pages, noting the dense legal formatting and the bright yellow sticky flags pointing directly to the signature lines on the final page. "Sign this, Rebecca," William commands, his voice dropping the fake, jovial tone he used for his investors. He leans forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to physically intimidate me with his presence. "It is a standard tax waiver for your old college fund. The accountants need it closed out before the end of the fiscal year to avoid unnecessary penalties." He waves his hand dismissively, acting as though the paperwork is a tedious administrative chore. He offers a cold, patronizing smile, crossing his arms. "Sign it, and maybe Jamal will hire you to do payroll for his restaurants. We know you are drowning in medical debt right now, and you clearly need a steady paycheck. It is a generous offer, considering your recent lack of professional judgment." He sits back, waiting for me to eagerly accept the humiliating lifeline, completely convinced my broken ribs and desperate financial situation have broken my spirit. I do not immediately reach for the fountain pen resting beside the documents. Instead, I pick up the stack of papers, holding them firmly in my hands, and begin reading the dense paragraphs. My eyes scan the complex legal jargon with the rapid, practiced efficiency of a senior forensic accountant. William arrogantly assumes I am far too heavily medicated and physically exhausted to understand the intricate financial terminology, banking entirely on my physical trauma to cloud my judgment. But I am not reading the paperwork to understand the stipulations. I already know exactly what the contract demands. I am reading it to publicly expose the staggering magnitude of his deception to the entire dining room. I clear my throat, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity over the sudden, highly nervous silence of the assembled guests. "A standard tax waiver," I repeat slowly, letting the hollow words hang in the heavy air. That is an interesting title for a highly complex document that explicitly invokes the total and permanent relinquishment of primary beneficiary rights. I flip to the second page of the contract, firmly pointing my index finger at a specific, heavily buried paragraph designed to trap the signatory. I begin reading the fine print aloud, my tone loud, steady, and commanding. "The undersigned hereby voluntarily forfeits any and all claims present and future to the principal corpus and generated dividends of the primary trust, executing an absolute transfer of sole ownership directly to the designated guardian William." A collective gasp ripples through the dining room as the wealthy investors slowly realize they are witnessing a financial shakedown happening right in front of their eyes. I lock my gaze directly onto William's face, watching the smug arrogance rapidly drain from his features, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. "This is not a college fund waiver," I state coldly, projecting my voice so every person sitting at the table hears the truth. "This is a legal surrender of my grandfather's private trust. You are asking me to sign away my legal rights to $45 million, handing you my inheritance, hours before it legally transfers to my name at midnight." The horrific reality of my statement crashes down upon the formal dining room, completely shattering the elegant holiday atmosphere into jagged pieces. William's face flushes a dangerous crimson as his grand deceptive scheme is brutally dragged into the glaring light for all to witness. Before he can formulate a defense to save his crumbling reputation, Brittany violently slams her manicured hands onto the table, her heavy diamond bracelet clanking against the fine crystal glasses. She glares at me with pure venom, her face twisted in a display of unchecked entitlement. "Just sign the damn paper, Rebecca." Brittany scoffs, loudly abandoning her high society persona. She points a manicured finger directly at my face, her voice shrill and dripping with absolute contempt. "You owe Mom and Dad for pulling you out of the gutter. You were a pathetic charity case, and they generously gave you a life. Stop being a selfish burden, and sign the document right now so we can finish our dinner in peace." She leans back in her expensive chair, acting like my absolute refusal to hand over a $45 million fortune is just a childish temper tantrum ruining her evening. I do not break eye contact with my sister, as her shrill command hangs in the stifling air. The investors sitting around the table hold their collective breath, their eyes darting rapidly between my bruised face and the dense legal contract. Moving with agonizing slowness to protect my fractured ribs, I pick up the heavy stack of papers. The white parchment feels heavy laden with 28 years of calculated deception. I grip the top edge of the document with both hands, feeling the rigid tension radiating through my forearms. With a sudden sharp motion, I pull my hands in opposite directions. The thick stack of forged legal demands tears straight down the middle, with a loud, incredibly satisfying ripping sound that echoes sharply off the vaulted ceilings. I place the two torn halves neatly together, stacking them with the precise care of a forensic accountant organizing a damning audit file. I grip the thick bundle again and apply maximum pressure, tearing the pages into quarters. The brutal sound of the destruction cuts through the heavy silence of the room like a physical weapon. The wealthy guests sit absolutely frozen in their chairs, witnessing the catastrophic implosion of the perfect family facade. Catherine gasps from the opposite end of the long mahogany table, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth in horror. She watches helplessly as her multi-million-dollar retirement plan is shredded into scraps. I hold the torn quarters of the fraudulent contract directly over my expensive crystal wine glass, which is filled to the brim with a rare vintage red. I open my fingers and let the shredded pieces flutter downward. They land softly in the deep crimson liquid, immediately soaking up the wine and dissolving into a soggy, useless mess. The dark liquid bleeds rapidly through the bright yellow signature flags, completely obliterating William's desperate attempt to steal my inheritance. I push the ruined glass back toward the center of the table, making sure it sits directly in William's line of sight. The dining room descends into an absolute deafening silence. Nobody dares to speak or move as the irreversible weight of my defiance finally settles over the stunned audience. The absolute silence is shattered by the explosive sound of William slamming his closed fist down onto the polished mahogany table. The brutal impact rattles the fine silver cutlery and sends a sharp wave of crimson wine sloshing over the rims of several crystal glasses. He violently pushes his heavy wooden dining chair backward, the wooden legs screeching agonizingly against the expensive hardwood floor. He stands up to his full height, his physical posture aggressively threatening, as he attempts to use his sheer size to intimidate me into immediate submission. The veins in his neck bulge visibly against his tight collar, and his face transforms into a terrifying shade of deep mottled purple. The sophisticated executive persona he carefully maintained for his wealthy investors instantly evaporates, replaced by the raw rage of a desperate predator who just realized his trap has completely failed. "What the hell are you doing?" William roars, his booming voice vibrating against the custom wallpaper and rattling the crystal chandelier above us. He points a trembling, furious finger directly at my face, disregarding the shocked expressions of the high-profile guests seated around him. "You ungrateful little wretch. We took you in when nobody else wanted you. We fed you, clothed you, and gave you a respectable name. You owe us every single breath in your pathetic body. You are going to sit back down right now, look at me with the respect I deserve, and sign a fresh copy of those documents before I throw you out onto the street with nothing." He breathes heavily, his chest heaving with unrestrained fury, fully expecting his aggressive tirade to immediately crush my rebellion and force me back into my lifelong role as the submissive, terrified victim. His vicious outburst hangs heavily in the tense air, exposing the toxic reality of my childhood to the entire room. The investors exchange uncomfortable glances, finally seeing the monstrous reality hiding behind the lavish holiday decorations. Jamal shifts nervously in his seat, realizing that his father-in-law's constructed image is rapidly disintegrating. Catherine remains frozen at the far end of the table, her eyes darting frantically between William's enraged face and the soggy, ruined contract floating in my wineglass. They are completely paralyzed by my unprecedented defiance, unable to comprehend how the compliant girl they abused for decades has suddenly found the overwhelming courage to publicly destroy their financial lifeline. They are waiting for me to break to surrender, but they do not realize they are no longer dealing with a frightened child. I do not flinch or cower under the immense weight of his explosive rage. Instead, I maintain my icy demeanor, standing tall despite the searing pain radiating from my fractured ribs. I calmly reach inside the tailored inner pocket of my sharp charcoal blazer and pull out the thick, pristine stack of authorized federal documents Harrison handed to me just hours ago. The heavy legal paper feels incredibly empowering in my grasp, a tangible weapon forged from absolute truth and rigorous forensic analysis. I drop the imposing bundle directly onto the table with an authoritative thud, letting the official government seal's face directly toward William's infuriated gaze. I look directly into his panicked eyes, my voice cutting through the thick tension with the lethal precision of a steel blade. "I am not signing away my $45 million trust. William, I state clearly and deliberately, ensuring every single person in the room hears the exact financial magnitude of his attempted theft. But 30 minutes ago, I did sign the documents authorizing the immediate freezing of your offshore accounts. Every single stolen dollar you hid in the Cayman Islands, every domestic holding company, and the deed to this very mansion are now entirely under federal lockdown. You have absolutely nothing left." I retrieve a secondary stack of papers, slamming them down next to the federal warrants. These are pristine, unredacted bank statements spanning 3 decades. I spread the pages across the table, ensuring the bold financial figures face the wealthy investors watching this spectacle with morbid fascination. I point to the first page, my voice ringing with clinical detachment. "I have spent the last 48 hours doing what I do best. I audited this family. I tracked every penny of the trust fund my biological grandfather left for me, the trust you swore never existed." I looked directly at William, whose face has drained to a sickly ashen gray. I detail how he siphoned the quarterly dividends the moment they hit the guardianship accounts, funneling cash through shell companies to avoid detection. I flip to the next page, tapping a highlighted column. This line item details the exact offshore transfer that funded the purchase of this magnificent mansion. I slide another sheet toward the center of the table. These transactions correlate flawlessly with the purchase of your imported luxury cars, endless European vacations, and exorbitant country club fees you used to climb the suburban social ladder. You built an empire of prestige and privilege, using money legally designated for my care, education, and future. You stole my inheritance and used it to parade around as elites while forcing me to work minimum wage jobs to afford basic college tuition. Catherine finally finds her voice, attempting to salvage her shattered dignity in front of her high society peers. She stands up, her hands trembling violently as she clutches her expensive silk napkin. "Rebecca, you are completely misunderstanding the financial structure," she stammers, her voice shrill and desperate. "We used those funds to provide a stable household for you. We managed that money to keep the entire family secure. You were a difficult child, and raising you required significant resources. We did what responsible parents would do to protect our assets." Her pathetic attempt at justification falls completely flat. I do not let her finish the desperate lie. I slam my hand against the table, the sharp crack silencing her instantly. You did not protect anything except your own bottomless greed, I reply, my tone dropping to a lethal, icy calm. I have the fabricated expense reports, Catherine. I know exactly how you categorized your designer wardrobes and luxury spa retreats as my specialized developmental therapy. You did not spend a single dime of that money on my well-being. You bled my grandfather's legacy dry to fund your absolute vanity, treating me like a repulsive burden every day. The room is suffocatingly quiet now. The wealthy investors are physically leaning away from William and Catherine, eager to distance themselves from the fallout of a massive federal crime. I turn my full attention back to William, locking my eyes onto his terrified face. The financial embezzlement is not even the most sickening part of your grand design, I state, my voice echoing loudly in the tense dining room. The truly monstrous part is what happened on Wednesday night, when the hospital called to tell you I was bleeding out on an operating table with crushed ribs. You left me there to suffer. I take a slow, deliberate step forward, ignoring the burning agony in my chest. You did not stay away because you were basting a turkey, I say, pronouncing every word with sharp, undeniable clarity. You stayed away because you were waiting for me to bleed to death before my 34th birthday today. I watch Catherine gasp, her hand flying to her throat as the darkest secret of their plan is dragged into the glaring light. I read the master trust documents, William. I know exactly how the mortality clause functions. I know that if I died before midnight tonight, the entire $45 million principal would permanently default directly into your unrestricted control. You viewed my death as a payday. The horrified murmurs from the dinner guests confirm that the absolute depravity of the scheme has fully registered. You intentionally canceled my premium health insurance 48 hours before my crash, hoping the hospital would delay my life-saving trauma care due to lack of coverage. You wanted me to die. You needed me to die. My survival on that highway was the absolute worst possible outcome for your retirement plan. You sat in this lavish kitchen eagerly waiting for the hospital to call back and confirm that the annoying adopted girl was finally dead so you could legally cash in your multi-million-dollar lottery ticket. You sacrificed my life for pure greed. Brittany sits paralyzed in her chair, her eyes wide with mounting terror, as the devastating reality of my words shatters her perfect suburban illusion. She looks down at the diamond tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist, suddenly realizing that her entire existence of unchecked privilege, her debt-free education, and her luxurious penthouse were entirely funded by a criminal enterprise. Her identity as the successful golden child is nothing but a fraudulent mirage built directly upon my stolen inheritance and my physical suffering. The smug smirk she wore just 10 minutes ago is erased, replaced by the frantic, wide-eyed panic of a woman watching her financial ruin unfold in real time. She looks frantically at William, then at Catherine, silently begging them to deny the horrific accusations, but their terrified silence provides all the confirmation she needs. The realization hits her with the crushing force of a freight train. Every luxury she has ever enjoyed was bought with dirty money, and the federal government is freezing every asset connected to her name. Her breath hitches in a sudden panic attack as she comprehends that she is no longer an heiress, but the direct beneficiary of a massive federal fraud scheme. Jamal stands up abruptly, the heavy mahogany chair screeching against the floor, his face a mask of defensive fury. He radiates the desperate arrogance of a man who has convinced himself that his fake success is real. He strides toward me, pointing a shaky finger at my chest, his voice vibrating with feigned indignation. "You are absolutely crazy!" He barks, his eyes darting around the room to see if the investors are buying his performance. "You are just a bitter, broken woman trying to tear down everything because you could not hold your own life together. I built my entire restaurant empire from the absolute ground up. Every seat, every plate, every dollar in my bank account came from my own vision and my own hard work. How dare you sit here and try to undermine my legitimacy with these ridiculous fabricated accusations?" He stops just inches from me, puffing out his chest, as if his physical presence alone could intimidate me into silence. He looks at William, seeking an ally, but my father is currently staring at the floor, utterly defeated. Jamal feels the shifting tide in the room, but he doubles down on his delusion, convinced he can talk his way out of this disaster. He starts rambling about his marketing brilliance, his exclusive connections, and his future expansion plans, desperate to distract the investors from the wreckage. He keeps shouting that he is a self-made entrepreneur, a visionary of the industry, but every word he speaks only reinforces the shallow, hollow persona I have spent weeks systematically dismantled. He is terrified not of the truth, but of the complete loss of his status. I do not raise my voice to counter him. I wait for the precise moment he pauses for air. Then I slide the most damning section of the ledger across the table. It hits the wood with a heavy final sound. I suggest you stop talking, Jamal. I say, my voice steady and dangerously low. I do not care about your fabricated vision or your pathetic lies. You built absolutely nothing. You are nothing more than a high-end money mule, an expendable pawn in William's game. I watch his face as he glances down at the document, his bravado instantly wilting. The color drains from his skin, his hands beginning to tremble as he realizes the sheer terrifying scale of the evidence laid out before him. I lean forward, making sure every guest hears my next words. William funneled $8 million of my trust money directly through your restaurant accounts to launder it, effectively masking his offshore embezzlement as legitimate business revenue. You are not a successful entrepreneur, Jamal. You are a felony tax evader. You signed the corporate tax returns every single year, affirming that those millions were business profits when they were actually stolen funds. I watch him flip through the pages, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic, as he recognizes the specific bank routing numbers and the official business identification numbers. He spent his entire career masquerading as a wealthy mogul, but the documents show that his entire revenue stream was built on a foundation of criminal liability. He tries to stammer a defense, muttering about how he did not know how he just signed the papers William gave him. But the ledgers tell a different story. I point to a series of signatures on the loan modification documents, highlighting the exact dates and amounts that prove his direct active involvement. I explain how he knowingly facilitated the laundering, accepting the injection of illegal capital as business revenue to avoid filing for bankruptcy years ago. I detail the specific kickbacks he received, funds that he spent on personal luxury items, while his restaurants actually lost money every single month. He is not a victim of William's scheme. He is a primary willing participant who traded his integrity for a fake title and a temporary ego boost. Jamal drops the folder back onto the mahogany table, his face now a mask of pure horror. The realization hits him with the crushing weight of reality. He finally understands that he was never a partner, never a visionary, and never a self-made success. He was a disposable shield, a fall guy carefully placed to absorb the legal consequences if the federal government ever decided to investigate William's financial irregularities. He looks at William, who remains hunched over, unable to even lift his head. The betrayal he feels is profound, not because William misled him, but because he finally recognizes the pathetic small role he played in a much larger, darker game. His entire sense of self, his ego, and his carefully curated public persona have been completely and utterly destroyed. He slumps back into his chair, the fire extinguished from his eyes as he stares blankly at the evidence. The investors look away, visibly disgusted, no longer interested in the fake entrepreneur who just lost everything. Jamal is now just a man who has been used and discarded, left with nothing but his own colossal hubris and the impending threat of a lengthy prison sentence. He realizes he has no allies left, no stories left to tell, and no wealth to sustain his charade. I hold his gaze until he looks down at the table, broken. I have successfully dismantled the last pillar of their collective ego, leaving them completely vulnerable before the authorities. The final piece of this phase is almost complete. My heart beats steadily, devoid of any doubt. I have the power to destroy them, and I am watching them do it to themselves. I sit back, keeping the evidence of their downfall in clear view of everyone. The tension in the room is electric, a suffocating mix of fear, betrayal, and genuine horror as the truth finally takes root. William and Catherine are ruined. Jamal is exposed, and Brittany is just a ghost in her own house. I check my watch, realizing the time. The transition into the next stage of my plan is only moments away. I remain silent, letting them sit in the ruin they created. The room remains frozen as the implications of Jamal's fall circulate among the guests. My father slowly raises his head, looking at me with eyes that are no longer filled with contempt, but with pure, unadulterated fear. He finally understands that I am not just a victim, but a strategic opponent who has analyzed every single one of his weaknesses. He looks toward the door, clearly hoping for an escape that no longer exists. I just watch him, enjoying the absolute stillness. Every second of their discomfort is a small repayment for the decades of psychological degradation I endured under their roof. They are truly, finally, entirely alone in their own house. I pick up the water glass, seeing my own reflection in the crystal, and feel a sense of profound power. I have successfully dismantled the illusion, revealing the rotted core of the family that once controlled my life. They expected a spineless, broken, desperate daughter to come crawl to them for help, but instead they got a forensic accountant ready to audit their entire existence. I have systematically exposed every lie, every hidden account, and every criminal transaction. There is absolutely nowhere left for them to run. The evidence is complete, the case is closed, and the only thing left now is to watch the federal authorities dismantle what remains of their hollow, fraudulent lives. I wait for the final act to begin, entirely in control of my fate. Jamal lunges across the table, his composure entirely shattered by the terrifying realization of his impending prison sentence. He grabs William by the lapels of his expensive blazer, shaking him with a frantic, desperate intensity. "You set me up!" Jamal roars, his voice cracking with pure panic. "You told me those were legitimate investor funds. You swore to me that everything was legal and above board. Yet you were funneling millions of dollars through my restaurants to hide your own greed." He is no longer the polished entrepreneur. He is a man watching his life evaporate. He begins cursing loudly at Brittany, who is frozen in her chair, still clutching the diamond bracelet that is now nothing more than evidence of a felony crime. The realization that his marriage, his status, and his professional future are inextricably tied to William's massive federal tax fraud triggers a violent, irrational outburst of self-preservation. He screams that he never would have touched the money if he had known it was stolen from a private trust. He blames Brittany for her insatiable demand for luxury, shouting that it was her constant need for designer clothes and social clout that forced him to accept William's corrupt financial injections. Jamal is lashing out at everyone in his orbit, attempting to distance himself from the criminal enterprise he actively helped sustain for years. He accuses the entire family of conspiring to turn him into the sacrificial lamb of their operation. Every accusation he levels at them is a desperate attempt to mitigate his own undeniable complicity, but his words only serve to drag the rest of them deeper into the spiraling chaos. Brittany does not take the assault on her character or her father lying down. She erupts with a shrill, piercing scream that vibrates the crystal glasses still sitting on the table. She claws at Jamal's hands, trying to break his grip on William, her eyes wild with rage. "You are the one who spent it all," she shrieks, her voice bordering on hysteria. "You were the one who wanted the status, the fancy restaurants, and the high-end lifestyle. My father was just trying to help you keep your failing business afloat, and you have the audacity to blame him for your incompetence." She is frantic, defending her father's criminal legacy, because it is the only thing that has ever given her a sense of superiority over the rest of the world. She pivots her fury toward Catherine, her movements erratic and sharp. She screams at her mother for not securing the money sooner, for not ensuring the legal paperwork was airtight, and for not anticipating that I would ever have the intelligence to audit their accounts. Brittany's screams are a desperate attempt to divert attention from her own guilt, lashing out at the woman she always admired for her cold, calculated control. The house, the lifestyle, the reputation, it is all disappearing, and she is clawing at her own mother in a futile bid to maintain her identity as the golden child. The dining room becomes a war zone of accusations and blame as the family cannibalizes itself, revealing the deep-seated rot that has always been hidden beneath the polished veneer. Every shred of their carefully maintained dignity vanishes as they trade insults and trade secrets about each other's hidden agendas. William tries to bellow over the chaos, but his authority has completely evaporated and nobody listens to his frantic, stuttering explanations. The investors have already backed away from the table, their phones recording the disintegration of the Blackwell family. Jamal accuses William of destroying his future. Brittany blames Catherine for their social fall, and Catherine wails about how they all betrayed her trust. The once prestigious unified front is now just a group of desperate cornered animals turning their teeth on each other, driven by the instinctual terror of the federal investigation closing in on them from all sides. I sit back in my chair entirely unmoved by the frantic display of their self-destruction. I slowly pick up my glass of water, feeling the cool condensation on the surface, and take a long, refreshing sip. I watch the fiery implosion of the people who spent 3 decades making me feel small, discarded, and worthless. Their panicked screaming, their frantic finger-pointing, and their desperate scramble for blame is more satisfying than any apology they could have ever manufactured. They are finally receiving the exact chaos they spent years meticulously sowing in my life. I don't need to say a single word to fuel their collapse. They are doing a perfect job of destroying themselves. I simply observe the spectacle, my heart rate steady and my mind clear, reveling in the fact that their downfall is their own doing. The justice I am witnessing is not just about the law, it is about the inevitable consequence of a life built on lies. They are effectively tearing each other apart before the agents even have to step forward and intervene, proving that their bond was never built on love, but on shared greed. It is a masterclass in karmic retribution, and I intend to savor every single second of their final public breakdown. William's face transitions from a mask of panicked desperation into an expression of pure, unadulterated homicidal rage. He is entirely consumed by the loss of his reputation, his social standing, and the inevitable realization that his $45 million safety net has vanished instantly. He ignores the sobbing of his wife and the hysterical screaming of his daughter, focusing his singular venomous intent on me. He pushes his chair back with such violent force that it flips over and slams against the wall behind him. With a guttural, animalistic roar, he lunges across the dining table, his hands outstretched like claws. He is moving with the reckless abandon of a man who knows his entire existence has just been incinerated. "I will kill you myself," he bellows, his voice cracking with madness as he clears the space between us. The investors and extended family members dive under the dining table or scramble toward the exit, their terrified screams echoing through the grand hall. I remain perfectly still, watching William's descent, as if time has slowed to a crawl. My ribs scream in protest as I prepare to dodge his clumsy, frantic grab, but I am entirely grounded by the cold reality that he is already a ghost. He is a man running on nothing but the fumes of his own destroyed ego, desperate for a physical outlet for the immense psychological devastation I have just inflicted upon him. He reaches the edge of the table, his fingers just inches away from my throat, his eyes wide and bloodshot with genuine murderous intent. The sheer speed of his movement is a desperate final gamble, but he is completely blind to the reality of his own surroundings. He is so focused on the physical desire to silence me that he completely ignores the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots echoing through the foyer. He is an old, desperate man attacking a woman who has already systematically dismantled his world. He is a predator who has lost the ability to see the trap until his neck is already firmly inside the noose. He crashes into the table dishes, shattering beneath his weight, his hands mere centimeters from my skin, but he never makes contact. The front doors of the mansion are kicked open with such force that the heavy wood frame shudders against the stone walls. The heavy thud of the door hitting the wall is followed instantly by the sharp, authoritative shout of heavily armed federal agents. Harrison strides into the grand dining room, his coat billowing behind him like a dark cloak of impending judgment. He is flanked by 4 armed FBI agents, their tactical vests clearly marked in bold white letters. They move with lethal efficiency, forming a perimeter around the dining area before William can even process their presence. The agents carry their weapons at the low ready, their eyes scanning the room for potential threats, their physical presence entirely dominating the opulent space. The aggressive, homicidal look on William's face vanishes in an instant, replaced by a profound, hollow confusion, as he realizes he has been entirely outmaneuvered by a force he cannot possibly intimidate. The agents move forward, their movement coordinated and unstoppable. They pass the stunned investors and the trembling relatives, their boots clicking sharply against the cold marble floor. They are here to collect the debt William thought he could escape. One agent intercepts William before he can regain his balance from his failed lunge, spinning him around and slamming him against the heavy mahogany table. He is subdued instantly, his hands forced behind his back with plastic zip ties that bite into his wrists. Catherine lets out a sharp, piercing shriek as she realizes the federal intervention is not just a threat, but a physical reality. She tries to scramble toward the foyer to escape, but another agent blocks her path, calmly placing a hand on her shoulder and turning her to face the wall. Brittany collapses onto the plush rug, her hysteria reaching a new ear-splitting pitch as she watches her entire world being confiscated by the federal government. The agents move with mechanical indifference, entirely focused on their objectives. They do not care about the expensive decor, the spilled wine, or the shattered nerves of the wealthy dinner guests. They are a physical manifestation of the consequence that William and Catherine assumed would never catch up to them. The atmosphere of the dinner, once dominated by arrogant boasts and petty insults, is now defined by the heavy metallic smell of high-pressure, high-stakes federal law enforcement. The silence is absolute, save for the frantic whimpering of Brittany and the heavy, ragged breathing of the man who thought he was untouchable. Harrison walks to the center of the room, standing beside me, as if he were a silent, unwavering shadow. He looks at the destruction on the table, then at the agents securing the scene, and finally at my adoptive parents, who are now restrained and broken. He clears his throat, his deep, resonant voice echoing through the vaulted space. His tone is not just authoritative, it is final. The room seems to shrink under his gaze as he addresses the primary targets of the federal investigation: William and Catherine. He booms, his words landing with the weight of a judge's sentence. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The heavy sound of his voice signals the absolute end of the Blackwell family dynasty. Every accusation he levels is backed by the mountainous evidence I spent weeks compiling. William looks toward me, his face a pathetic mixture of rage and terror, but I do not look away. I simply watch him, the architect of my misery, finally facing the undeniable reality of his criminal choices. Harrison continues to read the arrest warrants, his voice steady and professional, detailing the long, sordid history of their financial crimes. The guests remain pressed against the walls, watching the terrifying conclusion of their opulent holiday dinner, clearly understanding they are witnessing the historic public collapse of a powerful family. It is a moment of total crystalline justice, and I savor the silence that follows his command. The grand dining room, until moments ago a symbol of the Blackwells' unearned opulence, descends into absolute frantic pandemonium. The FBI agents execute their duties with cold, terrifying efficiency, their voices cutting through the hysteric cacophony of my family's disintegration. William, his face a bruised shade of violet from his failed assault, struggles against the rigid plastic restraints biting into his wrists. He is no longer the titan of industry. He is merely an old man caught in the tightening web of his own greed. Catherine is pinned against the wall, her expensive silk gown bunching up as an agent secures her hands behind her back. She is no longer the composed matriarch of Beacon Hill. She is a common criminal watching her carefully cultivated image evaporate into thin air. Jamal, realizing the full extent of the federal evidence against him, completely breaks down in a pathetic display of cowardice. He drops to his knees on the cold marble floor, ignoring the broken glass and spilled wine surrounding him. He grabs the pant leg of the lead agent, sobbing uncontrollably as he begs for a deal. He blathers incoherently, screaming that he was merely a victim of William's brilliance, claiming he had no idea the massive injections of capital were proceeds of crime. He offers to turn on William to reveal every secret transaction and offshore location, his loyalty to his father-in-law dissolving the second he realizes his own freedom is on the line. He is a pathetic, sniveling mess, and I watch him with nothing but cold, clinical detachment. Brittany's reaction is a shrill, piercing nightmare of denial. She is frantically tossing her phone aside, screaming that she is entirely innocent and demanding to see her high-priced defense attorney. She throws herself onto the floor beside Jamal, kicking at the legs of the dining chairs and wailing that this is all a massive, tragic mistake. She demands to know who gave the agents this information, glaring around the room, as if she might discover my role in their downfall. She is entirely oblivious to the fact that her own ego, her own spending habits, and her own smug certainty that I was a worthless charity case are the very things that guaranteed their capture. She is a woman who has never known the meaning of accountability, and she is entirely unprepared for the crushing weight of the justice system now descending upon her. The scene is a masterpiece of karmic retribution, the perfect silent ending to decades of systematic psychological torture. I stand by the head of the table, perfectly motionless, my eyes tracking every frantic, useless movement they make. I have spent years meticulously documenting their malice, and seeing them finally stripped of their power is a cathartic release that feels like the ultimate final breath of relief. There is no triumph in their suffering, only the quiet, inevitable satisfaction of watching the architects of my destruction forced to inhabit the very hell they spent their lives building for me. Catherine is hauled upright by two agents, her heels clicking uselessly on the marble as she is dragged toward the main entrance. As she passes me, she violently jerks her head around, her eyes wide, with a mixture of raw hatred and desperate disbelief. "You owe us," she spits, her voice raspy with venom and absolute delusion. "We raised you. We gave you everything I have sacrificed my entire life to ensure you had a roof over your head and a name that actually meant something in this city. How could you do this to your own family?" She stares at me as if she is genuinely the victim in this scenario, still entirely trapped within her toxic narrative. I feel a strange cold clarity wash over my body, effectively drowning out the lingering sharp throb of my broken ribs. I do not raise my voice, and I do not lose my composure. I reach out and slowly, deliberately straighten the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer, grounding myself in the reality of my professional strength. "You raised a forensic accountant, Catherine," I reply, my tone entirely void of the childhood fear that once defined me. "That was your only mistake. You taught me to look for the truth, to track every hidden penny, and to ensure that the numbers always balance out in the end. You built a monster out of your own greed, and you shouldn't be surprised when it finally comes to audit your books." She recoils as if I had physically struck her the undeniable truth of my statement, cutting through her defensive wall of lies. She is hauled out the front door, her indignant protests finally silenced by the slamming of the heavy armored vehicle doors outside. Brittany is dragged out next, still sobbing about her reputation, and Jamal is led away in silence, his head hanging low as he finally faces the reality of his prison sentence. The house that had once served as their fortress of lies becomes an hollow, echoing shell. The expensive scent of luxury slowly fades, replaced by the sterile, lingering odor of fear and the heavy finality of justice served. The dining room eventually descends into an absolute, suffocating quiet. The investors have long since fled, leaving behind a scene of absolute wreckage, shattered glass, ruined documents, and the pervasive, heavy atmosphere of a family's total annihilation. I remain standing exactly where I am, alone in the opulent room I now legally possess. Harrison walks over to the side, his posture still perfectly professional as he surveys the aftermath. He does not offer hollow condolences, and he does not ask if I am all right. He simply respects the moment, understanding that this silence is the first true breath of freedom I have taken in 28 years. I look at the empty chairs, imagining William and Catherine sitting there just minutes ago, arrogant and untouchable. They thought they could erase me from the world, and now they are the ones who have been erased. The weight of their influence is gone, the threat of their manipulation is extinguished, and the massive fortune they stole is now rightfully under my control. I turn my back on the dining table, leaving the shattered pieces of their empire behind, and walk toward the grand staircase. I have a lifetime to build, and for the first time, I am starting with a clean, perfectly balanced ledger. 6 months have passed since the night the mansion shattered, and the world feels fundamentally different through the lens of genuine freedom. My physical recovery is complete. The ribs have knit together. The internal bleeding is a distant memory, and the scars on my body have faded just as quickly as the need for their validation. The legal fallout was swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. William and Catherine facing an insurmountable mountain of evidence from my forensic audits, and the federal investigation pled guilty to all charges to avoid the maximum 20-year sentence. They are currently serving 12-year terms in a federal penitentiary miles away from the country clubs and luxury resorts they once called home. The irony of them residing in small, sterile cells after spending decades siphoning my fortune is not lost on me. Jamal's downward spiral was even more comprehensive. He filed for personal bankruptcy within weeks of the raids, his entire restaurant empire liquidated to pay back creditors and federal fines. He lost his home, his reputation, and his marriage. Brittany, left with absolutely nothing, was forced to move into a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She is currently working long shifts as a barista at a local coffee shop, laboring for minimum wage to pay off the mounting legal debts incurred during their defense. She is completely cut off from the lifestyle she once flaunted, stripped of the diamond bracelets and designer clothes that defined her superficial existence. The karma they faced was not some mystical force, but the direct result of the lives they chose to build. William's obsession with control and Catherine's desperate need to play the perfect matriarch ultimately became the instruments of their own destruction. They treated their own daughter as an expendable resource, never realizing that the very person they underestimated was the only one capable of holding them accountable. They are paying the price for 28 years of systematic fraud, and they are doing so in absolute isolation. I do not feel joy in their suffering, but I do feel a profound sense of balance restored to the universe. My own life has undergone a transformation that feels less like a recovery and more like an awakening. I sold the mansion that was built on the foundation of my stolen inheritance, refusing to live in a monument to their depravity. I reclaimed the $45 million from the trust, and instead of spending it on luxuries, I channeled the funds into something that actually matters. I established the Harrington Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing free forensic accounting and legal aid to other victims of financial abuse, institutional gaslighting, and corporate fraud. We provide the resources and professional expertise that I was desperately missing when I was struggling to pay my own medical bills. Every day in my new role as the foundation director, I see the faces of people who have been silenced, manipulated, and discarded by those they trusted most. I help them audit their own lives, trace the stolen assets, and build the legal cases necessary to dismantle the control others hold over them. I have redefined my own worth, no longer measured by the standards set by people who viewed me as a liability. My professional expertise, once mocked by my own family, is now the cornerstone of my independence and the catalyst for helping others reclaim their autonomy. I am no longer an accountant for someone else's bottom line. I am the architect of my own legacy. The transition from a broken victim to a woman in control was never about the money, even though the $45 million provided the necessary capital for my foundation's mission. It was about the psychological liberation of realizing that I never needed their permission to exist. I have learned that true strength is found in the willingness to walk away from people who do not see your value. The mansion, the wealth, and the social status were just external masks they wore to hide their own profound emptiness. By removing them, I didn't lose a family. I simply removed a weight that was preventing me from breathing. The final realization I carry with me is that boundaries are not just suggestions, they are the absolute necessary requirements for survival in a world filled with predators. When I was gasping for air in that hospital room, William and Catherine told the world and themselves that I was not their problem. They made their choice with absolute clarity and cold indifference. Now, I have embraced that same truth in reverse. Their survival, their prison sentences, and their financial ruin are no longer my problem. I have severed the toxic umbilical cord that kept me tied to their cycle of abuse, and for the first time I am fully in control of my own story. If you are watching this, you might be trapped in a cycle with someone who treats your life like a disposable asset. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to destroy the lies of a toxic family member and reclaim your power? Let me know your story in the comments below, because your truth deserves to be heard. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and legal victory. Remember that you are the author of your own life, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can ever do is simply refuse to let the villains win. The most profound lesson from Rebecca's journey is that true security must be built upon self-reliance, rather than the fragile, conditional promises of toxic family members. For nearly 3 decades, Rebecca tethered her self-worth to the validation of people who viewed her only as a financial resource to be exploited. She operated under the illusion that by being the reliable one and funding their lifestyle, she would eventually earn a place in their hearts. However, the moment she faced a life-threatening crisis, the mask fell away, proving that her presence and achievements were never what they valued, only the capital she could provide was. This story serves as a stark reminder that we cannot earn love from those who are fundamentally incapable of offering it. When people prioritize image and status over the life of their own child, they reveal that their family is nothing more than a transactional arrangement. Rebecca's transformation into a formidable forensic accountant demonstrates that when we stop seeking approval from those who wish us harm, we unlock a terrifying and empowering level of clarity. By documenting their deceits and exposing their fraud with cold, hard facts, she reclaimed her autonomy and proved that boundaries are not just defenses, they are the foundation of a healthy life. Ultimately, the betrayal she endured became the catalyst for her to build a future where her value is defined by her own integrity and professional success, not by the parasitic demands of her abusers. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to destroy the lies of a toxic family member and reclaim your power?